Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Today's guest is Selin Kurnaz, and Selin is the founder and CEO of Massive Bio. Massive Bio is an artificial intelligence-powered platform that connects cancer patients to clinical trials. So in today's session, Selin, Ted, and I are going to talk and explore about the awareness, access, and process for enrollment, learn about the last mile, and provide lessons to tech startups, understand stakeholder motivations, and so much more. It's a really fun one, and we had a lot of fun recording it. Hope you enjoy it. Can you give us a bit of a background of your story and how you ended up founding Massive Bio?
Wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting me for this webcast, first of all. So I had no, visibility that I was going to found Massive Bio. Massive Bio has been founded based on my family's frustration in cancer care. My uncle has been diagnosed with cancer, and that was definitely a devastating story for me and for my family. At that point in time, I was working at Ernst & Young. I was one of the co-founders of their private equity value creation unit, and I was basically planning to open up my own growth equity fund and invest in companies at different growth stages. But my uncle has been diagnosed with cancer, and when that until that point in time, I had family, friends, and all the others has been diagnosed with cancer, but that was the first time that the cancer really hit the family. And it became very clear that, the journey is very difficult for the patient. The journey is very difficult for the family of the patient. And also, as a person that is coming from an engineering background, it is also very unscripted. So, and my engineering brain didn't get this unscripted, because you go to different, physicians, you get different answers. Like, everyone has their own right or wrong, but you never necessarily be sure which one is the real right or which one is the real wrong. And I, thought that this is not correct, at least at this data and technology age. So then I started Massive Bio in order to be able to provide the options to the cancer patients, in terms of clinical trial access, because right now there is more than 14,000 actively recruiting oncology and hematology clinical trials at clinicaltrials.gov. And 50% of the time when the patients go to their oncologist, they're not even discussed anything about a clinical trial. And for the remaining 50% that discusses about the clinical trials, they're only talking about the clinical trials that the physician is aware of in their own facility. Yesterday I was talking to my colleagues. They were talking about a physician in the same institution of the principal investigator of one clinical trial. Even that individual, physician doesn't even know that that clinical trial exists in their own institution. So there is this very limited knowledge at the physician level in terms of the clinical trials, only limited with their, four walls of the facility. And there are, of course, large institutions that has a couple of hundred clinical trials. But at the end of the day, if you're working about like 14,000, 16, 17, 19,000 in certain instances, clinical trials, just, actively recruiting, at the world of oncology, these like hundreds, tens are very, very small fraction of the total population, which means that you may be missing an access to 95% of this if you don't know, if you are not aware of, if you are not evaluated. And the other aspect is that, if you wanted to be evaluated for even for a single trial, it's a logistical hassle. You need to go to a site, you need to be pre-screened, you need to take an appointment. If you try to add this thing for, 14,000 clinical trials, it becomes an unmanageable time, because it takes about 25 minutes, even just to manually pre-screen a patient to a single clinical trial. For these 14,000, it takes about 8.09 months for a single patient. And And if you are a cancer patient, that 8 months is a huge amount of time in your journey. And I'm not even talking about the logistics of that, actually, just the pre-screening part of this. If you add the logistic, it is almost technically impossible to be able to pre-screen for these trials in your lifetime. So
that's remarkable.
That is the part that my brain couldn't take in this world of age of data and technology.
That's such an incredible statistic. So 14,000 trials on clinicaltrials.gov. And we know, like, anyone who has ever tried to navigate and actually find something on clinicaltrials.gov that's relevant to them. I'm on there all the time, but I know the ins and outs. And even if I got to the right study at the right site, often their contact information just isn't there. The sponsor will have some kind of a central number, and you may have no success in actually getting connected with the site if you call that number or send an email to that address. So, wow.
I've got a really sad example of this. An organization, I was stress testing that very process, Ted, and rang up centrally to say, I've got patients that I want to refer. How do I do it? And I was just sent to clinicaltrials.gov from a sponsor's website, which is extremely sad, as you say, Selina, in this day and age. So if I recap, Selina, what you just said there is that effectively the problem statements, the challenges in matching cancer patients to relevant trials is, there's one, an awareness problem, there's two, is an access problem, and then there is a process problem of what and what I liked about, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more around this, is this unscripted, this in my head I had like a binary, like numbers, ones and zeros as such, right, to try. And so my understanding is that you're effectively industrializing that awareness, access, and process to large volumes of patient. Can you talk a little bit more around this, the unscripted aspect of your process?
So at the end of the day, what I would like to do with my team is the following. I want a cancer patient sit down in their living room. They basically call a phone number or email a phone number. And then after that point, I want them to sit down and wait the results to arrive from these, like global search of clinical trials. And then it would like to provide them the options in terms of which X number of clinical trials that they're eligible for based on this mega, mining of the clinicaltrials.gov. And I would like to help them and their treating oncologists during the selection. And when the selection has been done, I want to basically provide them the concierge enrollment service, like a white glove touch to them, to be able to help them to manage the referral process, the logistics process, the insurance related matters, so that they basically get into that trial. I'm not saying that with no hassle, but with limited and controllable number of hassles. So that's kind of the dream that we're trying to achieve in here.
Yeah, there's so many barriers that are put up in the patient's path. So yeah, it's one thing to actually find out about a trial that would be relevant and that they may qualify for, but it's a whole other discussion entirely about navigating that process, which can be extremely difficult. And you're 100% right. I see we put up so many walls that prevent people from being able to enroll in these studies.
Absolutely. So go ahead.
I was just about to say, it's really interesting because what you're actually doing, right, is that you've got this volume problem, which is the volume of, but then you've got a very individualized problem set as well, right? And what's really nice is that you're applying technology to the volume problem, but personal with the concierge to the individual, which is a very nice framing.
Yeah, you need to basically combine the scale with the personalized individual needs and priorities. That's what we are trying to do.
Yeah, so I really like how you described the concierge service. Can we dig into that a little more? Like, what does that look like for an individual patient?
Yeah, so for the individual patient, it's about 3+1 activities actually. So the first one is that once the clinical trial choice has been made with the patient as well as a treating oncologist of the patient, because this is a collaborative team effort between the patient and the treating oncologist, then there has to be a determination of which site is the closest site for this patient, which is great. But after that site determination, then the next question is this site active and operational? Is this site basically taking patients? Because 3 weeks ago, we had a patient that we wanted to refer to the site, and then the site was not in clinicaltrials.gov. It shows that the site is, active and operational, but when you call the site, they are not accepting the patient. And 2 days after, we receive a notification that the site withdrew from the study. So there is these nuances that's happening in the background. So you need to basically put this thing into rest to have a clarity. Are you recruiting? You're not recruiting. Even in certain instances, people don't know at the site that if that trial is recruiting. There are, I have been in phone conversation where I had to convince the site that that study is their study. So there are so many interesting things that happen in that. Once the confirmation is done that this is the basically the trial that is at that site, then setting up a handover meeting with the site to make sure that all the information about the patient has been successfully transitioned to the site. Of course, there are appropriate consents, all the other things that's happening in the background. So that's one. The other thing, which is a very interesting thing in the industry, is that pharma companies has wonderful travel and reimbursement plans to patients when the patient signs the study consent. But before the patient signs the study consent, they're not aware of what is happening. It's not intentional because they haven't necessarily touched the patient at that point in time. So what we try to do is that we try to connect the patient to the resources of the pharma companies, travel and reimbursement, and these logistic resources before the patient signs the consent, because that's where the deal breaker is. Because if the patient doesn't get that access, they're not going to go to the pre-screening visit. If they're not going to go to the pre-screening visit, they're not going to sign a consent. So that is the other area, the nebulous area. Before the patient signs a consent, what are some of the needs that the patient has in terms of the logistics, where the patient is going to stay to go to when they go to that pre-screening visit, how they're going to travel, who is going to support them. So that's the second area. The third area is the holy grail of the insurance. Does the patient have the right insurance? And also when the site is in a different state, when the patient moves to that different state, is it going to be in-state, out of state, or in outside US? Is it going to be a public insurance, private insurance? All those nuances that needs to be swift through to understand what is the best structure for the patient, and is there a need for any kind of a financial assistance that the patient needs to take from any kind of a financial assistance program, or even some programs from pharma. So that is the third part. In addition to that, there is another holy grail, which is the molecular diagnostic testing. Cancer is, the world of oncology is definitely going towards the world of precision medicine. But in order to be able to evaluate the precision medicine, you need to understand the patient's biomarker status. And in order to be able to do that, the patient needs to have certain types of testing. So 97% of the patients that come to our patient contact centers are coming from non-NCI designated cancer centers. They are coming from community-based practices. And 87.5% of those patients are not tested. So you're not going to be able to find a precision medicine driven clinical trial for a patient if you don't know the biomarker status of that patient. And when there is no testing, or when there is limited testing, in these, community-based institutions, then my team helps the treating oncologist to navigate the ordering of the molecular diagnostic testing so that we see the results when we do the clinical trial matching for these, advanced treatments that the patient can potentially have access to. So that's the kind of the 3+1, because today is something that could potentially be known and surfaced in the industry, but the molecular diagnostic testing, the need and the navigation for that, because people think that, that happens. It doesn't happen. You have to navigate it. So those are the areas where we would like to close all these operational nuances, because there are 41 steps between the identification of the patient to the enrollment of the patient. And any disconnect and not so great job in that step leads to lack of enrollment in the cancer patient's journey to that clinical trial.
Did you say 41 steps?
41 steps.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, I love it when groups do this, Selin. There's something so, I guess it comes from an engineering perspective as well, or a framework, a mindset, because ultimately every point in that process is a potential constraint to move through to the next one, right? So you have to be able to monitor, you have to be able to manage that, to be able to say something's stuck here, we now need to unblock it. So congratulations on that, because that's a wonderful, fantastic thing.